Stop. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. It was a day I won't soon forget. By all appearances, it was just a regular Saturday night dinner. Even young Julie was with us, staying over for the weekend as she often did. Julie's mother, Denise, was a widow and worked weekends as a dispatcher for a taxi service. Julie and our daughter, Laura, had become inseparable since high school, regularly having sleepovers at each other's houses. Julie stayed with us most Fridays and Saturdays, while Denise covered her 12-hour night shifts. My ex-wife, Sandy, knew Denise pretty well, though I had never met her. Sandy used to joke that Denise might turn my head, so she made sure we never crossed paths. At that time, I was traveling often for work, aiming to make my mark in a competitive industry. Sandy usually handled everything with the kids, and on Sundays, a cab would swing by to pick up Julie. She loved the treats the cab drivers occasionally brought, and Laura found it all pretty exciting too. Anyway, back to that infamous Saturday night dinner. The four of us were at the table, sharing a meal, when out of the blue, Sandy looked up and said, "Peter, I want a divorce. I'm leaving you." She said it so matter-of-factly that it felt like a strange prank. When your wife of a decade suddenly declares she wants a divorce, it takes a moment to process. "I'm serious. I want a divorce. I've met someone else and want to spend my life with him," she continued, as if it was no big deal. With two 8-year-old girls at the table, including our own daughter, I kept my cool. I might have muttered something ridiculous like, "Well, if that's how it is, I guess I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow." Sandy replied casually, "No, you'll keep the house. You'll need it for Laura." I sat down my fork, no longer pretending to eat, and just stared at her. "We're going on a trip around the world," she added, still not even glancing at me. "Laura can't miss school." "You've got to be kidding me," I said a little louder than intended, doing my best to keep it together for the girl's sake. Sandy must have planned to say it then, knowing I wouldn't make a scene in front of the kids. "I want to see the world while I'm still young enough to enjoy it," she added, blind to the irony. When we first got together, I was the one passionate about travel. I had dreams of exploring the world after finishing my engineering degree. Sandy and I used to talk about seeing the Grand Canyon, the Rockies, and even New Zealand. But she wanted to have kids first, saying she wanted to do it while I'm young enough to enjoy them. I thought I understood her reasoning. Her parents had been older when they had her, so she wanted to experience life with our kids while she was still youthful. But apparently, her perspective changed. Raising Laura wasn't as fulfilling as she'd imagined. The pregnancy and birth hadn't been easy, and she had let go of the idea of more kids without much discussion. I almost laughed at the irony, but instead went out to prune the rose bushes, just needing to do something to clear my head. After a few minutes, I noticed Laura and Julie standing quietly beside me, helping watch out for thorns. "Girls, be careful you're not wearing gloves," I warned. "We're fine, Dad," Laura replied. "What's your mom doing?" I asked. "She's upstairs, packing," Laura said, almost calmly. I felt a surge of anger but didn't want to take it out on the roses. Instead, I focused on the girls, resisting the urge to storm upstairs. "Sorry, Laura," I mumbled. "Why are you sorry, Daddy?" she asked. "You didn't leave us." "Mom did," she answered. Most of her friends at school had dads who'd left, and she'd rather be with a dad who loved her than a mom who, well, she left the sentence unfinished. I still wonder what she was going to say. Sandy had always seemed like a caring mother. Had I been oblivious? As I watched the girls working together on a rose bush, I could hear Sandy on the phone, probably talking to her new man. "All right, who wants ice cream?" I asked. The girls cheered, and we headed out to a restaurant to get the biggest sundaes we could find. They took their time enjoying them, giving me a few moments to digest what had just happened and consider what was next. To my surprise, I wasn't all that upset that Sandy was leaving. The love I once felt for her had faded the moment she'd made her announcement. My main concern now was managing childcare. I could handle taking care of Laura, but would need help with school drop-offs and vacations. My job wouldn't make it easy to handle the school schedule. I realized Julie's mom would ever have her hands full with her own challenges while I figured out mine. I decided to call my sister, Beth, to explain the situation and see if she could help. My only plan was to see if Beth could pick up Laura from school. It would be a long drive for her, but maybe it could work. She did what? Beth almost shouted when I explained what happened, keeping the details vague in front of the girls. I realized I didn't know much about Sandy's new relationship. She's left us for some guy named Ron. I told her, trying to keep the irritation from seeping through my words. Ron, a customer at the library. Laura chimed in, and Julie added, Mom said he's one of her regulars. Sandy had been working part-time at the local library, so it made sense. My problem, I continued to Beth, is that I can't pick Laura up from school every day. I can drop her off in the mornings, but getting off work by 2:30 every day is impossible. It's okay, Dad. Julie's mom is going to pick me up, Laura said. But it wouldn't be fair to expect her to do that every single day, I replied. Oh, it's no trouble, Laura replied. We already have a plan. Julie will stay with us on weekends, and during the week, I'll stay with Julie and her mom. You can drive us to school on Mondays, and then Julie's mom will handle the pickups. Beth, overhearing the plan, said, I think that's a brilliant idea, Peter. Did you ask Denise about this arrangement? No, I've never actually met Julie's mom, so I wasn't sure she'd be up for it, I admitted. Julie then added, Mom said the cab company wants her to work Sundays, but she didn't want to impose on Laura's mom too much. It seemed the girls had managed to solve the problem for me. What does Julie's mom look like? Beth asked. I paused, realizing I had no idea. I've never actually met her. Well, you'd better go introduce yourself soon and see what she thinks of the arrangement, Beth advised. Has Sandy moved out yet? No clue. We're out at a restaurant. She was still packing when we left, I replied. Beth suggested I get some new locks while I was in town. Let me know if you need anything tonight. Josh and I can swing by, but we'd have to bring the kids. Thanks, Beth, but I think we're okay. I got all the help I need right here, I said, nodding at the girls. They exchanged a grin, and I couldn't help but smile too. Beth wasn't surprised or upset that Sandy was leaving. They were never close. After the ice cream, we headed back to the car. I realized I needed to talk to Julie's mother and let her know that I'd be the only adult with the girls that evening, just to make sure she was comfortable with it. These days, you can never be too careful, especially since I'd never actually met Julie's mom. I pulled up to the cab office and left the girls in the car while I went inside. I'm Peter Jackson. I'm looking for Julie's mother, I said to the cabbie at the counter. I recognized him vaguely from one of Julie's Sunday pickups. Oddly, I didn't even know Julie's mom's real name. We all just called her Julie's mother, and Julie herself called her mom. The cabbie gestured toward a door labeled Ladies Only, with a sign that read Denise's office. The other cab drivers went silent, their eyes fixed on the TV in the corner. After what felt like a long wait, Denise appeared. She was strikingly beautiful, simply dressed in jeans and a blouse, but with a natural elegance. Denise, someone's here to see you, the cabbie announced. Hey, Peter, is everything okay? She asked, smiling, but with a hint of concern. Yeah, no, well, maybe, I replied, feeling a bit awkward. Julie's fine. I just need to talk to you privately. Some of the cabbies started to move, but Denise waved them back, and we stepped outside. What's going on, Peter? You don't look too great, she observed as she spotted the girls in the car, waving at them. Sandy left me, I stammered. Talking to Denise felt odd, especially since she recognized me instantly. Her face softened. Oh, Peter, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Does this mean we're facing a childcare challenge tonight? No, Denise, not at all. I just wanted you to know I'd be watching the girls alone tonight. Since we hadn't officially met, I thought you should know. You're fine. Peter. Julie talks about you constantly. She practically thinks of you as a second dad. She even has a photo of you by her bed. Oh wow, where did she get that? I asked, surprised. Laura must have given it to her, Denise replied with a small smile. Do you want me to take the night off and bring the girls with me? No, really, it's fine. I'm perfectly capable of watching Julie. I just thought you'd want to be informed. I'm sure she couldn't be in better hands, she said, placing a gentle hand on my arm. I'll come by tomorrow morning to pick her up. You should rest. You have a long shift, I insisted. Maybe we can meet later to go over some plans. If you prefer, I can even drop Julie off. Yes, about the future, Denise replied thoughtfully. But don't worry, we'll figure something out. The girls have been cooking up all kinds of ideas. I smiled, reassured. Denise seemed genuinely relieved. Thanks, Peter. Well, I'll see you tomorrow night. And don't worry, Julie is a joy. She hugged the girls goodnight, reminding them to behave, and we headed home. But when we pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked there. As I stopped at the curb, Sandy stepped out and waved. Where have you been? I've been waiting for hours, she demanded. She hardly gave me a chance to reply before currently announcing that she was leaving. The way she acted, you'd think she was someone else entirely. If that's who I think it is, tell him to move his car before I do it myself. I snapped, frustrated by the sight of her new guy's car in our driveway. Sandy gestured at him, and the Jaguar across the street roared to life, pulling away. Ignoring her, I backed into the spot the Jaguar had vacated. She complained that I almost hit her, but I just replied, "Oh, you're still here. I thought you'd left," then walked toward the house. "Not taking your car?" I asked, noticing her Nissan sitting empty while the Jaguar was packed to the brim. "No point. I'll sell it. We're flying out on Wednesday," she replied. Before I could ask, she preempted me. "Ron's lawyer's address is on the kitchen table," she said flatly, and then turned to speak briefly to Laura and Julie. I didn't wait around to hear what she had to say and went inside with the girls trailing after me. They gave each other a high five, but I pretended not to notice. We watched TV for a bit, and then I sent them to bed. They didn't argue, which was unusual for Laura, but I think they sensed it was time to let me unwind. I poured myself a couple of whiskeys, hoping it would help me get some sleep. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon frying. For a split second, I thought Sandy was making breakfast, but then the events of the day before came rushing back. The house felt different, like all traces of Sandy had been wiped away. Even the pictures of her parents were gone. I checked the bathroom, and sure enough, her personal items had vanished too. It seemed someone had cleaned up during the night. "Come on, Dad, breakfast is getting cold," Laura called from the stairs. In the kitchen, the girls had set everything up like a hotel breakfast, with coffee, juice, and fries. They even had cornflakes and tea set out. I complimented them, and they beamed. Beth, Josh, and their kids arrived before we finished eating. Despite the chaos of a broken coffee maker, the girls managed to serve coffee to Beth and Josh. It took a bit of encouragement, but soon they left the dishes to go play with their cousins. Meanwhile, Beth began washing up, and Josh and I had coffee while I filled him in on what had happened. They both reassured me that they'd help however they could. Josh recommended a good divorce lawyer, and Beth put together dinner from what we had in the fridge. I spent most of the day tending to the roses, with Julie and Laura popping by now and then to help out. At one point, Julie quoted a line from a song. It's been a good year for the roses, and it struck a bittersweet note, given everything that had happened. Around 4:30, a cab pulled up, and Denise arrived. The girls let Denise in, and we got properly acquainted. Beth, Denise, and I discussed the girls' babysitting arrangement. Denise confirmed that she'd be taking a Sunday night shift, which would pay more than her current schedule. We settled on a plan with some minor tweaks and Beth's occasional help during school breaks. Denise called her boss right away to confirm the new shift, and he agreed on the spot. She glanced at me for approval, and I nodded. We then realized July needed her school clothes for the next day, so Beth drove Denise and July home to pick them up, with Laura tagging along. As I carried Julie's bag into the house, I asked Denise if she had a car. I do, or did. But since Michael left, I can't really afford to keep one, she replied. Well, what about using Sandy's old car? I suggested, pointing to Sandy's car in the driveway. Oh, I can't, Denise said, shaking her head. Why not? She told me to get rid of it. But you'll need it to take Laura to and from school, she said. Don't worry about that. Let's call the insurance company and add you as a driver, I insisted. Laura piped up. His name's Ron, Dad. Who cares? I muttered. Ron the Rat sounds better to me, I replied, frustrated. Laura laughed, pointing out that Ron the Rat sounded like a puppet character from her favorite show. I couldn't help but smile and let it go. Over the next few weeks, we adjusted to our new routines. Beth and Josh often visited on Saturdays to check the pantry and sometimes made us lunch. Housework was never my strong suit, but I managed to keep things in order, and Beth never complained. Weekdays felt lonely, but I adjusted. Fridays became a highlight when I'd come home to Denise and the girls. Denise usually cooked for us before her Friday night shift, which made the empty house a little more bearable. The toughest part was waking up alone every morning. The divorce process was complicated. Sandy and her new guy had skipped the country, bouncing around, which made it hard for her lawyer to contact her. On top of that, his ex-wife was pursuing child support, and his Italian accounts were frozen. Every so often, Sandy's attorney would call me, and I'd pass along whatever information Laura had managed to pick up about her mother's whereabouts. I don't know if Laura fully understood why I needed those details, but her intel ended up helping my case. Sandy's lack of communication with her attorney played in my favor. At one court hearing, her attorney requested another delay, saying he was waiting on a response from her. The judge looked frustrated. Mr. Jackson, do you know where your wife is? He asked. I'm sorry, sir, I answered, standing up. I haven't spoken with my wife since she left us. I didn't mention her brief calls to Laura every few weeks, as the judge hadn't asked about them. He noted Sandy's unreasonable behavior and declared that I had grounds for desertion. With that, he granted my divorce and awarded me full custody of Laura. I don't see how joint custody would work if Mrs. Jackson can't even communicate with her attorney, he said. He then told Sandy's attorney that she had 21 days to appear in court if she wished to challenge his decision. Then, turning back to me, the judge added, I'm surprised you haven't demanded child support from your wife. Frankly, Your Honor, I doubt there's much hope of collecting it unless she returns to the country, I replied. He ordered a nominal $100 monthly payment, knowing it was unlikely I'd ever see a cent. Still, it set a precedent. He advised my lawyer to look into any assets Sandy might still have in Italy, but I never bothered to follow up. I walked out of court a single man with full custody of Laura and rights to any property Sandy had left behind. On Monday, I noticed an international call in the call log from the day before, likely from Sandy, but neither Laura nor Julie mentioned it. I figured it out but didn't dwell on it. Our new routine kept me busy enough. As time passed, Sandy's calls to Laura became less frequent. It didn't surprise me. They were brief and one-sided, aside from Laura's subtle questions about her mom's location, which stopped altogether once Ron's divorce was finalized. Somehow, Laura and Julie found out about it, likely through school connections. The divorce was finalized about 4 months ago. One Saturday, while we were out for a movie and burgers, Julie casually mentioned that she and her mom might have to move because of a rent increase. I hadn't realized this was part of a broader plan. The girls had been plotting all along to have Denise and Julie move in with us. At dinner that Friday, Laura casually asked Denise, "So, have you found a new apartment yet?" Julie chimed in with some exaggerated horror stories about their search, and then Laura suggested, "Why don't you and July just move in with us? We have a spare room." I thought about Laura's suggestion, realizing it could work. It would save Denise from paying rent and cut down on her hectic schedule. But when I looked at Denise, she quickly avoided eye contact. I didn't want to put her on the spot, so I tried to tread carefully. "Well, sometimes people get the wrong idea about a man and a woman living together," I said cautiously. Denise laughed. "Oh, come on, Peter. You sound like a prude. I was just thinking about your reputation." "My reputation?" she snorted. "You've got to be kidding. The folks at my complex already gossip about me because I'm gone every weekend and drive a new car. They think I'm doing something shady." "You're joking." "Nope. They even wrote to my landlord. I told them I work at a cab company, but the rumors just won't quit." "You need to get out of there," I replied. "I know, but finding an affordable place isn't easy," she sighed. "But Laura's idea does make sense. There's plenty of space here." "Yeah, you're right. Without the girls, this place feels like a morgue. And you're not a bad cook either." "Should I take that as a compliment?" She grinned. "Yes, absolutely. The room is yours if you want it. The girls would love to have you both here." Denise hesitated. "We'd have to talk about rent," she suggested. "No need. I don't like housekeeping, and you're a much better cook. Maybe you could handle the cooking. I'll cover utilities and cleaning supplies." Denise insisted we'd work out the details later. "But you're sure you want us here?" "Definitely. So, when do you want to move in?" "Well, our apartment is furnished, but honestly, most of it can go. I sold the good stuff years ago after Micah left." So we agreed. Denise and Julie moved in with Laura and me. As we moved her things, I noticed Denise's look when I asked about Micah. I knew her husband had died in a car accident years ago, but the details were still raw for her. Later, while walking Denise to her car, I heard a loud smack from behind us and saw Laura and July looking overly innocent. Denise and Julie moved in the next week. Most of Denise's furniture was discarded, though a few pieces made it into the house, with the rest stored in the garage. Her TV and stereo ended up in the girls' room, and the house felt like a home again. My mood lifted, and I stopped going out for after-work drinks. I had bedtime stories to read now, and my boss started sending others on work trips, letting me stay home. Shortly after Denise moved in, I started to fall for her, though I did my best to keep it to myself. Denise was a year younger than me, always polished and full of humor. She was easygoing with the girls and somehow put up with my quirks. I realized I'd loved her from the start, though I hadn't fully admitted it. Beth noticed first, during Christmas. While setting the table, she asked, "So, have you told Denise yet?" "Told her what?" I asked, clueless. "That you're in love with her, you fool," she replied. "Don't be ridiculous, Beth. Peter, I can read you like an open book. You're more taken with Denise than you ever were with Judy Reyes." Judy Reyes was my high school crush who'd broken my heart. Beth and her friends had helped me get over it back then. "I'm fond of Denise, but I don't want to ruin the balance here," I said. "Peter, she likes you as much as you like her. Even the girls can see it. What should I do?" "Tell her how you feel, Peter. You've won hearts before." Sandy was different, though. "You never liked Sandy, did you?" "No, I didn't. She had you wrapped around her finger. But Denise genuinely cares for you and the girls." Just then, Denise walked into the kitchen to check on dinner, and Beth, and I quickly changed the subject. Throughout the meal, Beth kept shooting me knowing looks, even sharing private jokes with Laura and July. Over the next few days, I came close to bringing it up with Denise several times, but always chickened out. On New Year's Eve, Denise had to work, and Beth and Josh took the girls so I could go to an office party. I reluctantly agreed. By 4 a.m., the party had died down, and I called the cab. To my surprise, Denise answered. "Hey, gorgeous, can you send one of the guys to take me home?" I slurred. Are you serious, Peter? She laughed. I had a tough time deciding which phone number to call, I joked. Try not to get sick in the car, she warned, still laughing. Ted, the driver, arrived and helped me into the cab. As we drove, I realized we weren't headed toward my house. Wrong way, I mumbled. You need someone to put you to bed. And it won't be me. I think I know who'll volunteer, Ted chuckled. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Ted and Denise were helping me out of the cab. Denise clung to my arm as we headed to the door, and Ted helped me upstairs. Denise began loosening my tie and helping me get comfortable. Feeling emboldened, I saw it as my moment. Denise leaned over, and I muttered, You know, you're one incredibly gorgeous woman. Oh really, Peter? And what's that supposed to mean? It means you're too good to resist, I slurred. How much have you had to drink tonight? She asked, amused. Not enough. If I'd had a bit more, I'd have the guts to tell you how much I love you, I admitted. She smiled. Tell me when you're sober, and maybe I'll believe you. Now, get some sleep. She started to leave, but I gently held her arm and pulled her down beside me. She didn't try to get up, and I soon drifted off. The next morning, as sunlight flooded the room and my headache hit me, I found myself disappointed to see that Denise wasn't there beside me. I tried to lift my head and groaned in pain. Here, drink this, I heard Denise's voice behind me. What is it? I asked, squinting against the sunlight streaming into the room. Relax, it's not poison. That'll wait until you marry me. I need that life insurance first, she teased. Oh yeah? How do you know I won't beat you to it? I replied, attempting to sound clever. You couldn't, Peter. You have 2 daughters depending on you, she said with a smirk. One of them is yours, I reminded her. They see themselves as sisters, and they see you as their father, she noted. Well, Laura has started calling you Mom too. She's even said it a few times recently. Denise seemed surprised. I hadn't noticed. And Julie's been calling me Dad for at least a month, I added. Really? Has she? Denise looked astonished. Yes, even Beth and Josh noticed, I confirmed. Did you discuss it with Beth on Boxing Day? She inquired. Oh, we discussed plenty, I replied, trying to keep the conversation light despite my hangover. I think she's already planning her outfit for a wedding, I joked. Denise sat beside me, holding the drink she'd made, looking a bit lost in thought. Breaking the silence, I asked, So, are you going to marry me, or what? You haven't asked me yet, she pointed out. I wanted to gauge your answer first. Less embarrassing if you say no, I explained. Well, it wouldn't hurt to ask, she replied, a glint of humor in her eye. But, I prompted, sensing something unsaid. I have a confession. I'm not a widow. Micah's not dead, she confessed. Legally, I was never married to him. I felt a wave of confusion. Wait, what? Micah was a bigamist. He was already married when he married me, so our marriage was invalid, she explained calmly. Wow, so you're not actually a widow, and you were never legally married, I clarified. Exactly. It's just easier to let people think I'm a widow, she admitted with a shrug. In that case, I began, feeling bolder. Would you do me the honor of? But then we got distracted, and before I knew it, we were wrapped up in each other, kissing and laughing. By the time Josh dropped the girls off around 3 p.m., Denise and I were in the kitchen, figuring out how to break the news. The girls seemed to catch on right away, probably because Denise was practically sitting on my lap. They hugged us both, and when Josh came in, he chuckled, Congratulations. We set a date for mid-February and planned a simple celebration. Though the girls dreamed of something grand, we settled on a modest event with a registry office ceremony and a small reception afterward. Neither of us had many close relatives, and the registry office gave Denise peace of mind without the need for public announcements, which was simpler considering her widow status. After Josh left, Denise had the awkward task of resigning from her job at the cab company. She didn't want to work night shifts anymore, though that did mean I'd miss her during those nights. We agreed to sleep in separate bedrooms until the wedding, setting a good example for the girls. Yet, once the girls were back in school, I developed the habit of coming home for extended lunch breaks, which lifted my spirits quite a bit. The following weekend, Denise worked her last shifts at the cab office. Her colleagues sent her off with flowers and chocolates, and on Sunday night, several drivers and their wives took us out for a farewell dinner at a local pub. There wasn't a cab to be found in town that night. Our wedding day came quickly and went off without a hitch. The girls were perfect bridesmaids, and Denise looked stunning. We spent one night in the honeymoon suite at a luxury hotel where we held the reception, while Beth and Josh took the girls back home. We planned to spend most of the school summer vacation traveling together as a family. That first year, we spent 5 weeks exploring Florida, the Caribbean, and Arizona, experiencing as much as we could. A couple of weeks after the wedding, I noticed something was bothering Denise. The girls were happy, but Denise seemed troubled. Once they went to bed, I asked her what was on her mind. "Peter, does Julie know that Micah isn't actually dead?" she asked, her face worried. Her question took me by surprise. How would she know? We've never talked about it with them. Denise explained that the girls had started hiding photos of Sandy and Micah in their drawers. When she asked Julie why, Julie had replied, "They don't need us. We don't want to see their pictures." Julie knew her father hadn't died in an accident. He'd left, though she didn't know the full story. Denise had decided not to go into further detail, not wanting to burden Julie with the fact that she was technically illegitimate. Surprisingly, Julie didn't seem affected by the truth, and if anything, it seemed to strengthen the bond between her and Laura. Denise turned out to be a remarkable wife and mother. She was endlessly patient with the girls and with me, even when things got stressful at work. Despite my faults, Denise never complained and kept a playful sense of humor that made every day a bit brighter. Our nights were often busy, but always filled with warmth and laughter. By early summer, Sandy's calls to Laura had nearly stopped. Laura's irritation with her mom grew, and she started subtly referring to Denise as new mom during their brief conversations. When Sandy called, Laura would talk about our family activities and refer to Denise as Dad's wife and Julie as her sister. Denise and I discussed Laura's approach, but we realized we couldn't control how she handled her feelings. Sandy would just have to deal with the consequences of her actions. Before summer vacation ended, Laura and Julie began asking if we were truly their mom and dad. They left adoption brochures lying around the house, dropping hints about Denise adopting Laura and me adopting Julie. They even found forms to change Julie's last name to Jackson. After talking it over, Denise and I decided to pursue both adoptions. Though Julie's father still held legal rights, our attorney, who had managed my divorce, handled the process. It took over a year, but we were eventually able to terminate Micah's parental rights and finalize the adoptions. Coincidentally, the same judge from my divorce case oversaw Micah's termination. Officially, we became Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, with our daughters, Laura and Julie. We considered having more children but decided against it. Not long after the marriage, I received a promotion with a nice salary increase, which allowed me to delegate more at work. This opened up opportunities for family trips, making up for all the travel I dreamed of but never done. In our second year, we spent 5 weeks in Europe, the third year in Thailand and Vietnam, and the fourth in Indonesia and Malaysia. By the 5th summer, Laura and Julie, now 14, documented everything on their video cameras. That year, we planned a trip through Canada, the northern U.S. and Alaska, with the girls eagerly drafting detailed plans. About 2 years into our marriage, Sandy started sending Christmas cards with Canadian stamps, suggesting she and Ron had settled there. We never responded since she left no return address. Sandy was hardly mentioned, and she hadn't called Laura in years, so we didn't dwell on it. Our master travel plan changed when the girls pointed out that we couldn't visit every destination in one summer. After cutting down the list, we decided to focus on the West that year and save the East for later. We arrived in Ontario in late June and spent a couple of days exploring its historic sites. From there, we drove west through Manitoba, Saskatchewan, then south into the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas, before looping back north through Colorado and Wyoming, where we stayed at a dude ranch. The ranch was nice, though I found the Western saddles a bit nerve-wracking compared to the English ones I was used to. Eventually, we reached Montana and stopped in a town I'd always wanted to visit, probably because I'd read about it in some Western novel. After checking into a motel, we headed to a nearby diner. It was crowded and noisy, but suddenly, a loud clatter silenced the place. A waitress had dropped a tray of food, and as we turned to see what happened, I recognized her. She stared back at me, equally stunned, and her hand shook as she looked down at the scattered food. Denise recognized her too, and we exchanged glances before turning to our girls. "Nothing to worry about, Laura. Eat your dinner," Denise assured her. "Same to you, July," I added, each of us instinctively addressing our own daughter first, even 5 years after the adoption. The other diners, realizing we were somehow involved in the incident, kept glancing at us. Laura quickly recognized the woman, muttered, "So be it," and returned to her meal. Julie started a bit longer, then smiled at me, glanced at her mother, and went back to eating. As we headed to the car, Denise whispered to me, "I guess the grass wasn't as green as it looked on the other side." "What do you mean?" I asked. "If she's working here, she's probably no longer with Ron. One of them likely cheated. Once a cheater, always a cheater," I replied. "Leaving her daughter was like cheating too. It doesn't matter if she didn't cheat on me. Only if she tries to stir up trouble now. Laura's been through enough. It's too late for her to cause any real trouble," I said. "Laura handled it better than I did, that's for sure." The girls, Denise started but trailed off. "Don't say it, Denise. I know how clever they are, and I'm thankful for it. I just wonder how far their plans go," I said with a grin. "I wouldn't worry. I think everything is just as it should be," Denise chuckled. We reached the car, and I unlocked the doors. The kids piled into the back seats, and I opened the front door for Denise. She paused, then wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me. From the back seat, the girls murmured and cheered, teasing us with comments like, "Not in public," and "Wait until you're in your room." Despite their playful remarks, both girls had a maturity beyond their years. Julie had lost her father at 6, and Laura's mother left when she was only 8. Denise broke the kiss, whispering, "We have an audience." I glanced over my shoulder to see Sandy standing in the diner doorway, watching us intently. "Do you think Laura should?" Denise began. "Yeah," I replied, knowing this moment was inevitable. Laura would need to meet her mother, and I wanted it to be on her own terms. Denise leaned against the car as I spoke to Laura. "Your mom is here. I think you should go see her." "Do I have to?" Laura sighed. "She's your mother, and you might regret not taking this chance," Denise encouraged gently. With a reluctant shrug, Laura stepped out of the car. She looked back at us a few times before walking slowly toward Sandy, stopping about 10 feet away. Sandy said something I couldn't quite hear and took a step toward Laura, but Laura instantly backed away. It was frustrating not being able to hear their conversation, though it seemed like Laura was doing most of the talking. Each time Sandy tried to get closer, Laura stepped back. "This isn't looking good," Denise muttered, watching the interaction closely. "I know," I replied, feeling the tension. Eventually, Laura turned and ran back to the car, jumped in, slammed the door, and buckled her seatbelt without a word. Sandy disappeared back into the diner. I was ready to drive off, but Denise had other plans. She was already halfway to the door before Laura finished buckling in. I waited, letting Denise handle it. She came back about 10 minutes later, her expression saying, "Not here. Let's talk later." I started the car, and we drove to our next stop, a quiet spot along the river, where we planned to take a walk and see the waterfalls that the town was famous for. The dams had taken away some of their natural splendor, but they were still impressive. Denise and I never overdo the hiking thing, so we let the girls go ahead, giving us a chance to talk privately. "So, what did she say?" I asked. "Turns out he left her," Denise replied. 2 years ago, he dumped her for a waitress in this town. It's exactly what we guessed. I wonder why she didn't just go back to Italy, I said, shaking my head. She was left with the motel bill. The owner offered her work in the restaurant to pay it off. Now she shares a room with another woman, both working days in the restaurant and nights in the bar. Denise explained. "Sounds like a lovely setup," I muttered sarcastically. "So what does she do for fun? Hanging out with the barflies?" "Peter, don't be so harsh. She made her mistakes, and she's paying the price now," Denise replied calmly. "Anyway, she'll meet with you after her restaurant shift at 6. I'll take the girls out for dinner so you two can talk." "And what am I supposed to say to her?" I asked, frustrated. "Peter, you need closure, whatever you believe. She's still Laura's mother, and that counts for something." "Too bad she didn't think of that before," I said bitterly. "She regrets what she did, Peter. She wants to apologize to you and Laura, even if Laura isn't ready to accept it yet." Denise's voice softened. "We don't want to lose Laura over this." I looked at Denise thoughtfully. "You're a lot more forgiving about this than I expected, especially after what Micah did to you." "Peter, holding on to hate doesn't help anyone," Denise replied. "What Micah did to me was worse than what Sandy did to you or Laura. For a long time, I hated him and the other women he tricked. But one day, when I was sitting in the police station with those women, I realized we'd all been deceived. We weren't to blame, so we became friends, not rivals. Now, if he shows up, I'll report him to the police, but I won't spend a second hating him. I have people who matter far more." Denise kissed my cheek. "Besides, think about it. If Sandy hadn't left, where would we be now?" "You're right," I admitted with a sigh. "Thank you, Denise. Now let's hurry. It's almost 4, she said, glancing at her watch. I waited in the restaurant parking lot until Sandy came out after her shift. She emerged with another woman, who gave me a scrutinizing look before heading off. Sandy looked nervous, a shadow of the confident woman I remembered. Still, she looked remarkably the same. "Hi, Peter. Thanks for coming," she greeted me, her voice uncertain. "The bar's empty." "Let's go there and talk," I replied, gesturing for her to lead the way. She led us to a booth in the back, clearly expecting me. The other woman, now behind the bar, exchanged a few words with the bartender, and all the nearby booths were empty. Once we were seated, Sandy took a deep breath. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Peter," she whispered. "You've done me a favor," I replied simply, not wanting to drag this out. "And Denise got the better end of the deal," she said, bitterness in her tone. "I should have known she'd move in as soon as I left." "It wasn't like that," I replied. "From the moment I met Denise, I knew I wanted to be with her. Maybe I'd have left if I'd known her first. But who knows? I don't think I would have. I'm not one to walk away from my responsibilities." I paused, reflecting. "So, what happened to Ron?" "Oh, that fortune he flaunted was a lie," she replied, her tone turning dark. "He left his wife and kids with nothing, and she seized what little he had. He was wanted for fraud, stealing from people. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why he left me too. The last I heard, he slipped across the border into Canada when the FBI started closing in. Took off with a waitress, ironically. Now I'm working the job she left behind." "Did the FBI come after you too?" I asked. "Yeah, but I cut a deal. If I'm willing to testify against him, they agreed to go easy on me. I'm on probation. 2 years, restricted to this area until they find him. I report every week, but it's manageable since the sheriff's deputy, Tex, works nearby." she said with a sigh. And are you still paying off his debts? I inquired. I've nearly cleared them, but there's still a little left, she admitted. Seeing her struggle, I pulled out my checkbook. She started to protest, but I insisted. For once, Sandy, do as you're told. This should clear your debt and give you a little cushion. If you decide to return to Italy, I'll help you get settled. But remember, this doesn't mean you can interfere in our lives. You know the court stripped you of all parental rights to Laura. She made that clear earlier, Sandy confirmed, looking down. Oh, I'm sorry. That's not why we sent her to talk to you, I clarified. Sandy nodded. I realize that now. Peter, I was foolish. I never meant to hurt you or Laura. I got caught up in Ron's promises, and it wasn't worth it. I appreciate the apology, Sandy, but that's all in the past. Laura and I have moved on. Denise and I will try to make sure Laura keeps in touch with you, but understand that she has a new life now. That's more than I deserve, Peter. I don't deserve this check either, she said, holding it uncertainly. You'd better take it, Sandy. It'll help me sleep better, I said. No one. I did what I could. We'll be by tomorrow morning for breakfast. Maybe you can say a proper goodbye to Laura. Her voice shook as she replied. Thank you, Peter. You're being more kind than I deserve. No, Sandy, I said, standing up. You're Laura's mother, and I can't change that. Now, I'd like to get back to my family. Of course. I'm sorry, Peter, she whispered as I walked away without looking back. When I found Denise and the girls, they were waiting for me, all eyes on my face. I pulled Denise aside, gave her a brief summary of the conversation, and mentioned the check. She doesn't deserve your kindness, was all Denise said. That's exactly what she said, I replied, kissing my wife. But thank you for being there, I added, feeling grateful for her steady support. Later, I pulled Laura aside. I was about to start with the "you only have one birth mother" routine when she told me Denise and July had already covered it. Laura planned to talk to her mother at breakfast the next morning, but insisted that either Julie or I be there with her. When I asked why, she simply replied, because someone was always with me at the funeral, and I left it at that. The next morning, Laura, Julie, and Sandy sat at a table nearby, talking for quite a while. I guessed Sandy's coworkers were covering her shift because she didn't seem rushed. From what I overheard, the only part of their conversation I caught was the two girls excitedly talking about the roses growing in our garden. They all smiled throughout, and as we were getting ready to leave, Sandy came over, hugged the girls, and gave them each a goodbye kiss. Unexpectedly, she turned to Denise and me. These two are lucky. They found the best mom and dad they could ever have, she said softly, surprising me. Then she turned and hurried back to the diner, and I suspected she was crying as she went. I kissed Denise, and we got in the car, driving north toward the Canadian border. From the way the girls gazed out the back window, I could tell they weren't looking back with any regret about leaving that town behind. After we returned home, Sandy kept in touch periodically. Denise made a point of sending her letters regularly, though we never found out if the FBI had eventually caught Ron. Less than a year later, we received news that Sandy was marrying her deputy sheriff, Texas. We debated the idea of attending the wedding, but ultimately declined the invitation as a family. However, I felt compelled to go alone, so I slipped away for a few days to attend. Tex, as everyone called him, turned out to be a decent guy. He picked me up at the airport and introduced me to his friends and family. From what I gathered, Sandy had been completely open with him, admitting her past mistakes. Tex had even arranged for some trucker friends to send her Christmas cards from all over Canada, probably to hide her real circumstances. Giving away my ex-wife at her wedding was strange, but maybe it was the closure I needed. Over the following years, we learned that Sandy had 2 boys with Texas. Though we never met them, Laura and July kept in touch with their half-brothers as they grew up, though neither mentioned them to us often. Laura and Julie eventually married 2 brothers, and the two remained as close as ever. They played such a major role in their marriages that I almost felt sorry for their husbands. When our girls put their heads together, no one, including me, could keep up. Both had 2 children, and amusingly, their daughters were born not only close in date, but also almost right next door to each other. Denise and I have loved watching our grandkids grow, seeing glimpses of their mothers in them every day. Last year, I retired as managing director, and now Denise and I are finally enjoying an 8-month world tour. We've talked about finding a place to settle down, but something tells me our family will pull us back to Italy eventually. The girls refuse to let us sell the house, claiming they'd never part with the garden roses. They spend so much time there, and I still get updates from them. Just this morning, while checking my messages, I found a photo of my garden with the caption, "It's been a good year for the roses." Life goes on, and that's all there is to it. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.